In this lesson, I'm going to cover implementing network access protection. Now, the implementation will actually vary depending on are you enforcing DHCP, IPsec, 802.1x, Remote Desktop Gateway. But the good news is Microsoft has some fantastic step-by-step guides for all of the different deployment scenarios. So actually go to this page, and there's actually a checklist for all the different types of deployment you may need to perform. But I'm going to show you at a very high level the steps required to integrate with Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. Within the Network Policy Server, we have a Windows Security Health Validator. And this is provided by default, and we can actually modify these settings. So I'm going to go to Settings. We have a default configuration. So these are the checks that it's going to perform on our boxes. So the firewall must be enabled, but I have the choice here to change this. I might say, I don't require a firewall. It's going to say an antivirus application is on and it's up to date. Spyware protection is in place. Automatic updating is enabled. I can now say, do I want to restrict access that do not have all the available security updates? I can even set number of hours since it should have checked. Now under policies, I'm going to go to health policies. I don't have any. So I'm going to create a new health policy. Now I don't have any templates, but again, we could have gone to templates management for all of these things and actually create the different types of templates. If you are planning on creating a lot of these different types of configurations, creating a template will really give you a good head start. But I'm just going to say new. I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to say this is my DHCP check. And all I'm going to say here is the client must pass all of these checks within the System Health Validator. And the one I'm going to use is that Windows Security Health Validator. And all I have is that default configuration. So I've now created a health policy for that System Health Validator that's applied by default. I might also create a policy in a failure scenario. So I might say DHCP check fail. And this time it will be client fails one or more of the checks. So I may want to be able to differentiate between a pass and a failure. So I now have some checking scenarios. The next thing I need is a network policy to actually use this. So I'm going to say new policy, and I'm going to say DHCP compliant, and this would be a full access policy. Then my conditions are going to be based on that health validator. Here I'm going to say my health policies, and the health policy is going to be the DHCP check. Basically, it was successful. So that's my condition to be able to meet this network policy. I can now click next. I'm going to say access granted. I can ignore this screen. I'm going to ignore the constraints. But under my settings, here I'm going to go to NAP enforcement. And I'm going to say allow full network access. And that's now good to go. So I'm going to move this up. Now I want to create one that gives them a limited network. So let's say they've failed. So I'd create another network policy. And this time I'll say DHCP, and I'll say not compliant, limited access. So I'm going to do all the same settings as last time, except this time the condition is going to be on that health check. My health policy is going to be, this is when it's the fail. So it failed one of the checks. I'm going to continue through. Now I'm still going to say access granted. I click next for all of these. But this time in the NAP enforcement, I'm actually going to now configure allow limited access. Now notice I do have other options. I could have said allow full network access for a limited time. But I'm actually going to say allow limited access, and I'm not going to do auto remediation for right now. So I'm going to uncheck that. But what I'm actually going to leverage is under IP filter, I'm actually going to create an input filter. And right here, this is why I could say new, and I could limit what it's allowed to actually connect to. So maybe it would be a 192.168.50.0. And that's going to be my restriction. So now I've actually created an IP filter that's going to restrict if it failed any of those checks. So at this point, I have two different policies in my environment. So I'm going to move this up. One thing that is special about DHCP policies I do want to make sure on the constraints, I'm not going to use any authentication. This is a machine health check only. Again, this is something that is DHCP specific. For VPN, for example, you wouldn't want to enable that. This is just for it to work for DHCP because I'm just performing a health check. On my DHCP server, I can enable it at a scope or a server level. I'm going to look at the properties. And there's a network access protection. I can say enable for this scope, and I can just say use the default network access protection profile. Once DHCP has been enabled for NAP, the next step is to actually configure the client machines to give that statement of health information. Now you can configure all of this with group policy, but in this test lab environment, I'm just going to enable it on this single machine. So we're going to run the NAP client configuration tool. So this is just local on the machine, and this is part of the operating system. And this is going to enable me to do a lot of the configuration. Under enforcement clients, I'm going to enable the DHCP quarantine enforcement client. And notice I could also enable other types of client. So if I was doing 802.1x or VPN, I would enable the EAP quarantine. But I'm just going to focus on DHCP in this example. So that's now got that enabled. I can close this. I now need to make sure via the services MSC that the network access protection agent is running. So we can see here it is actually running and it's set to automatic. The next thing is I'm going to set a policy. So I'm going to open up gpedit.msc. So this is my local policy, but again, you could set this at a domain level. So I'm going to go to my computer configuration, administrative templates, Windows components, security center, because this is where it's actually going to be able to get the information to find out my statement of health. I say turn on security. I'm going to set that to enable. So this is going to turn on the security center. Click apply. So that's now enabled the security center on this machine. Go through the Microsoft guides, follow these, set this up in your environment, try the things out. There's some great troubleshooting tools available to help sort of test these. But this concludes the lesson on actually implementing a type of network access protection.